I'm starting it now.
It could be mine because I was on a live stream. They said I had no sound.
Yeah, I heard.
So
They said you had no sound, so I'm gonna wait to see, give them a chance to come in before we really get started. All right, let me turn my radio down. Yeah, because I was listening to the second one, the one you premiered, but it wasn't no sound. All right, let's see. This up. Oh shit. Let's give people enough time to come in. Let me switch this over. Channel. All right. All right. Peace, family. Today, what's going on? B1 for life. Today, today in this Black History Month, me and Brother Moses, we're going to be covering Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois, and Garvey. I'm also going to speak a little bit on Henry Highland Garnett. I'm gonna do a series. What's going on, Kenny? I'm gonna be doing a series on uh, African Americans all throughout this month of Black History Month. We're going to be reading about Carter G. Woodson, Ida B. Wells, many African Americans that's been instrumental in pushing us forward. Too many times I hear people come out and say the elders dropped the ball, or uh, they're not in alignment with the elders' rhetoric, even with the arguments that we hear today. And what I want to do what I want to do is I want to go back 100 years ago, where we can see the disagreements between the Du Bois and the Garveys and the Booker T. Washingtons, and how we still having these same arguments today as to which way we should go. Now, the arguments that we have on YouTube, when we look at the coons, a lot of our stuff now is done in ignorance because we don't know the people that we're we don't know our history. We don't know the people that was there before us and where a lot of these arguments came from. So today, I want to do a little demonstration and just show you the difference between the Du Bois, the Garvey arguments, and a little bit of Henry Highland Garnett, a little bit of Martin Delaney, because you had a lot of people that was on the front line that was instrumental in this quest. What's going on, Christopher Johnson, Kenny Conjo, in this quest for racial equality? So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to waste no time. I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to get right off into it. So let's just get right to it. We'll first start off, in this biography with. We'll first start off with this biography of W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington had clashing ideologies during the Civil Rights Movement. The differences between the activists were what made them stronger as pioneers of the movement. No account of Black history in America is complete without an examination of the rivalry between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, in which the late 1900s to the early 20th century changed the course of the quest for equality in American society, and in the process helped give birth to the modern civil rights movement. Through Washington and Du Bois were born in the same, though Washington and Du Bois were born in the same era, both highly accomplished scholars are and committed to the cause of civil rights for blacks in America. It was their difference in background and method that would have the greatest impact on the future. Now, when we hear, Brother Rob, what's happening, brother? When we hear these arguments, you're going to see the difference in backgrounds that force the way that they thought and the way that they teach. And then you will have a Garvey coming in right behind Booker T. Washington. But we're going to start it off with Booker T. and Du Bois first. Washington believed blacks should have economic independence. Born in slavery in Virginia in 1856, Washington's early life and education did much to influence his later thinking. After the Civil War, he worked in a salt mine and as a domestic for a white family and eventually attended the Hampton Institute, one of the first black schools in America. After completing his education, he began teaching, and in 1881 he was selected to head the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute in Alabama, a sort of vocational school that sought to give African Americans the necessary moral instructions and practical work skills to make them successful in the burgeoning industrial revolution. So he created a school that would have us ready to compete in this industrial revolution, which we call Tuskegee, but it was called Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute in Alabama, and this was in 1881. Washington believed that it was economic independence and the ability to show themselves as productive members of society that would eventually lead blacks to true equality, and that they should, for the time being, set aside any demands for civil rights. So at that time, he was saying that, listen, forget all the civil rights. We should set aside things for civil rights, and we should be plowing a road to be more self-sufficient. So this was Booker T. Washington's thought process at the time. He was saying, if we're going to build a school, we need to make our own bricks. We need to make our own underwear. We need to make our own buttons on the clothes. We need to be self-sufficient in this industrialized time. So Washington believed that it was economic independence and the ability to show themselves as productive members of society that would eventually lead blacks to true equality, and that they should show, for the time being, set aside any demands for civil rights. Now, a lot of people drew umbrage with this because they were looking at Booker T as to, wait a minute, set aside any demands for civil rights? And Booker T was saying, yes, we should set aside our demands for civil rights and learn to be more productive where we can do for self. And I don't know if I all the way agree with that, but I got to give you the information as it's told to us. These ideas formed the essence of a speech he delivered to a mixed race audience at the Cotton State, listen to this, at the Cotton State, an international exposition in Atlanta in 1895. The Cotton State. There and elsewhere, his ideas were readily accepted by both blacks who believed in the practical rationality of his approach, and whites who were more than happy to defer any real discussion of social and political equality for blacks to a later date. Now, where I disagree with him was he was being funded by the Tuskegee Institute, excuse me, I'm sorry. Oh man, I said the Tuskegee. He was being funded by the Carnegie Foundation. The Carnegies were funding him, who were supremely racist, and they were more than happy to have him not discuss real social and political topics of equality for blacks. They didn't want to discuss that. So Booker T. Washington was perfect for them. Booker T. not wanting to indulge in Brother Rob and those conversations. Well, yeah, we'll fund you. The same way kind of you have certain blacks today. Hey, we don't want to talk about reparations. We don't want to talk about those things, but we'll create a program. Yeah. I'm gonna get to it, Brother Rob. I'm gonna get to it. We'll create a program and we'll do these things. And right now, what I'm laying out is because I'm gonna get at the boys too. I gotta really break down. What I'm trying to do is break down where the arguments and the divisions were, so that way we can see where our arguments are today. And this is just the beginning of it, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to further this topic of conversation and then bring brothers on, Brother Rob, but we can really have intellectual conversations about the Booker T's, about the Garveys and the Boises. We need to have these conversations about the great ancestors that was before us that actually created the conversations that we have today. We have to start it. So the thing is, he was telling us, Booker T was telling us we need to learn to be more self-sufficient before we can start talking about equality in equality and having social discussions, where whites jumped on top of that. Well, see, Midtown Pookie, the reason why Booker T gets an unfair shake is most people are uneducated, and a lot of people are getting microphones and speaking. I'm teaching this the way it's supposed to be taught. Most people are supremely uneducated and got microphones and talking. And the problem is we don't have enough of these conversations. That's the problem. So what I'm saying is but what I have to do is tell the truth. I have to tell the truth from the beginning. So he was being funded by the Carnegie Foundation, and he was getting flack from the black community for not speaking out against the public hangings of black people. He would not speak on social issues. So this was his problem. While at the same time, he was telling black people to be more self-sufficient. So let's read more. And whites were who were more than happy to defer any real discussions of social and political equality for blacks to a later date. It was, however, referred to pejoratively as the Atlanta Compromise by its critics, and among them was Du Bois. So they called that speech that he did the Atlanta Compromise because of the way that some of the blacks took his speech. Let's read. Let's go down. Born to a free black family, Du Bois first experienced bigotry in college. Du Bois was born in 1868, and I'm gonna be honest with you. The first years of Du Bois' life, I was not a fan. I was not a fan. I would have probably been more of a fan of Booker T than of Du Bois. But we'll read on. Born to a free black family, Du Bois first experienced bigotry in college. Du Bois was born in 1868 to Great Barrington, Massachusetts, to a free black family and comparatively integrated community. He attended the local schools and excelled in his studies, eventually graduating as valedictorian of his class. However, when in 1885 he began attending Fisk University in Tennessee, he encountered for the first time open bigotry. I probably don't believe that. He says that he acquired for the first time open bigotry when he went to Tennessee, but he was born in 1868 in Massachusetts, as if they wasn't racist up north. They was just as racist up north as they was in the South. But I'll read on. He encountered for the first time open bigotry and repression of the Jim Crow South, and the experience had a profound impact on his thinking. Du Bois returned to the North to further his education with nothing less than equal rights for Black Americans, being his ultimate goal. When he earned his PhD from Harvard University in 1895, he was the first Black man to have done so. And his dissertation, The Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States of America, 1638 to 1870, was one of the first academic works on the subject. So this is a picture here of Du Bois. For those of y'all that may not know what Booker T looks like, this is an image of Booker T. Washington. So as we go down, this here is an image of Du Bois. Washington and Du Bois' ideologies clashed. By the early 20th century, Washington and Du Bois were the two most influential Black men in the country. Washington's conciliatory approach to civil rights had made him adept at fundraising from the Tuskegee for his Tuskegee Institute. So now I want y'all to pay attention. Because this is where I'll read it first and then I'll break it down. Now I'm gonna start. Washington and Du Bois, who were the most influential Black men in the country, Washington's conciliatory approach to civil rights had made him adept at fundraising for the Tuskegee Institute, as well as for other Black organizations, and he had also endeared him to the white establishment, including President Theodore Roosevelt, who often consulted him regarding all matters Black. So what Booker T was doing was basically playing a just playing a role to get what he had to get out of the white folks to establish black people. Now, some will look at that and call him a coon because these people would not pass an anti-lynching bill. These people, Roosevelt wouldn't pass an anti-lynching bill. These people were lynching black people. You had Jim Crow going on, and he was not. And because he would not speak out against these atrocities, he gained the trust of white people that was funding his establishment, where he turned around and was helping black people. So that's a complicated thing. So Booker T gets a bad rap, but it's complicated. Because some Kenny could call Booker T. Washington a sellout. Some would say no, he was playing white folks to get what he wanted. Right. So we got to look at it. We're going to look at it from two different perspectives. Because if I'm born during that time and black people being hung and he's hobnobbing with the president and with the Carnegies in them and he's getting money from them for establishing a school, how might a George Macon or a Taz or a Midtown Pookie at that time, how might we look at Booker T? See, we don't know because we wasn't there. Only thing I can do is give you the information. So here we go. On the other hand, the Bois he had by that time became the country's foremost black intellectual, having published numerous influential works on the condition of black Americans. In contrast to Washington, the Bois maintained an education. Wait a minute. The Bois maintained that education and civil rights were the only way to equality, and that conceding their pursuit was simply serve to reinforce the notion that blacks as second-class citizens. Well, the Bois thing was getting into these institutions and moving up in these institutions with education and racial equality, where Booker T, from what I'm gathering, knew that you wasn't going to get racial equality from these people. So we had to learn to be self-sufficient. So I'm not going to speak on white matters. I know what they're doing to us, but I'm going to create a school and begin to develop black people. But to this day, we see this argument happen now, where we're saying we got to build our communities. We got to be self-sufficient. But then your educated Negro is looking down on the community because he has education. Because see, this is the problem. For me, when I look at this, this is the conundrum. If I'm being funded by white folks and they're telling me what I can teach in my institution, they're controlling me. But if I'm being educated by white folks, they're still controlling me. So this is where the Garvey is birthed out. I agree, Brother Rob. I agree. But the problem is, if we look at it from our conscious aspect, the way we argue today, Brother Rob, the way we argue today, you see the educated class of black folks, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to look at themselves as better than the working class of black people. So the Bois would have represented the blue collar, roll your sleeves up black man because of his approach. We need to learn to be self-sufficient, where the Bois was saying we need education and equality. So this is where the ideologies clash. And to this day, we're still having this same clash within the ideologies. Because the educated lames or the educated, and I'll get to that in a minute. I'll get to that in a minute because I got some stuff to show you. More than just deepening the personal dislike between Washington and Du Bois, this ideological rift would in time prove to be one of the most important in the history of the struggle for civil rights. And to this day, Christopher Johnson, Brother Rob, it's still the same argument. All over Black YouTube, all in politics, all in the black community, it's the same argument we is still not rectified. So let's read more. Believing that political action and agitation were the only way to achieve equality, in 1905, Du Bois and other black intellectuals founded a group called Niagara, which was dedicated to the cause. Though the group eventually dissolved a few years later, in 1909, several of its members and many of its aims were incorporated into a new organization, the National Association for Achievement of Colored People. Oh man, wait till I get to Garvey. The NAACP for the next 25 years, the Bois was served as its director of publicity, as well as the editor of its journal, Crisis, which became the mouthpiece of the organization for the Bois and for the Black America in general. When President Woodrow Wilson assumed office in 1913, he immediately segregated the federal government, and Washington subsequently lost the political influence he had enjoyed for the previous decade. Washington died in Tuskegee, Alabama, on November 14th, 1915. And I want y'all to understand something. This is very important. When Woodrow Wilson got in office, he immediately segregated the federal office, and Washington subsequently lost his political influence. So when he got in there, they basically said to hell with Booker T. Washington and all the things that he was trying to do. And this is what made Garvey mad, because Garvey understood that they was going to never give us the attention and love that we should. And Garvey loved Booker T. Washington. So we got to look at this from different angles, Brother Rob, because Booker T never questioned the status quo, called it out. But once a regime changed, they told Booker T. Washington to kiss their behind and got him up out of there. And he ended up dying 2 years later. The Bois eventually split from the NAACP, but he continued to champion the cause of civil rights for both African Americans and the African diaspora around the world. After joining the American Communist Party in 1971, the Bois repatriated to Ghana and became a naturalized citizen. He died in Ghana August 27, 1963, at the age of 95. Martin Luther King led the the March on Washington the next day. So let's move on. Let's move on to the. Hold on. Matter of fact, you know what I want to do? I want to stay there for a minute. And I want to go here. I want to read you guys this article. Topaz, what's happening? And I want to read you this this actual writing from Carter G. Woodson about the educated class and what W.E.B. Du Bois was trying to create. Because remember, now the argument was between W.E.B. Du Bois, who wanted to push education and equal rights, and Booker T. Washington, who wanted us to push us to be more self-sufficient and not go after social issues right now to develop and get what we can get from these white folks. And at the end of the day, both of them end up being double-crossed. And then let me get into this in the miseducation of the Negro. So this is an article written by Henry Vance, right? Into the Academy, the Black Intellectual. Now, listen, this article is Into the Academy, the Black Intellectual and White Influence. And I want y'all to pay close attention to this, because I know I'm not going to get a lot of people in here when, hey, Courtney, when I'm giving y'all this real heat, because I know our people don't want to hear this real heat. We want to be unlearned and then run our mouth. But I'm going to give y'all some real information that you can take back for Black History Month. So when you hear people espouse all stuff, you know what you're hearing and you know how to defend it. So in the miseducation of the Negro, Carter G. Woodson warned the African Americans would never enter fully into the economic, political, and social institutions of America unless they received an education befitting to their peculiar situation. That's important. See, Brother Rich, Carter G. Woodson said, we will never fully enter the economic, political, and social institutions of America unless we receive an education befitting to their peculiar situation. which, with his famous essay, The Talented Tenth, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois identified those who must produce the educating befitting to blacks' peculiar situation. The Negro race, like all races, is going to be saved by its exceptional men. As the new millennium begins, it is still clear that the productivity of black intellectuals, the Boise Talented Tenth, remains critical to black America. Watch this. But are they prepared? And if not, why not? In The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, 1967, Professor Harold Cruz notes, unless the Negro intellectual's role as a class is identified, the entire Negro movement, all the way from integrationist to nationalist, is doomed to be bogged down and wasted through confusion and lack of direction. Whoo! I'm going to read that again. Because I know a lot of y'all missed it. I know they missed it, dog. In the crisis of the Negro Intellectual, 1967, Professor Harold Cruz notes, unless the Negro intellectual's role as a class is identified or redefined, the entire Negro movement, all the way from integration to nationalists, is doomed to be bogged down and wasted through the confusion and lack of direction. To this day, because we haven't been identified or redefined, we are bogged down through confusion and lack of direction. You see it play out in the way we vote. You see it play out in the way we identify ourselves. You see it play out all the way to the day we got to create an ADOS or a foundational black, because we have yet to identify who we are when we can begin to move to be seen as the people who are forced to be reckoned with. They talked about this 50 years ago. So no, did our ancestors drop the ball? Absolutely not. They was having these conversations 50 years ago. So I got to pull out the receipts now, because I'm tired of being on platforms just talking. I need to pull the receipts out and let you see just really what was going on with our people. So let me read on. Watch this, y'all. Declaring black thinkers, the public intellectuals of the 1990s, Robert Boynton maintains that they have thought less exclusively about the meaning of blackness. Uh-oh. Are y'all listening? Listen. I want y'all to listen very closely, because this ain't about Pookie and Ray Ray. This is from the top down. This is our educated class that our ancestors fought for to get into these institutions to be the best of us, Doug. I want y'all to listen very closely. Declaring black thinkers, the public intellectuals of the 1990s, Robert Boynton maintains they have thought less exclusively about the meaning of blackness and more inclusively about what it means to be African American. Woo! They're thinking more about, not about blackness, but more about what it means to be African American, taking pains to scrutinize both sides of the hyphen. At this critical juncture, listen, y'all, at this critical juncture, black intellectuals' confusion continues. Both black intellectuals and the black movement, as Cruz feared, are bogged down in large part because these intellectuals have yet to define themselves as a group within the American intelligentsia. They are still thinking too much about both sides of the hyphen. Because the trek of African American intellectuals over the past two generations increasingly has led them to predominantly white colleges and universities, their definition will reflect those institutions. Therein lies the problems, one more naughty than Cruz imagined. So y'all have to listen. It's telling you that because the trek of African American intellectuals over the past two generations increasingly has led them to predominantly white colleges. How can we get education that's peculiar to our problems? Dead shot, Dub. How, if we're going to these white institutions, how can you maintain the meaning of what it is to be black or blackness? How can you have education that's peculiar to your issues? Watch this. The African American scholar at PWC&U assumes the guardianship of a long and storied tradition of intellectual activity fueled by service, and increasingly shaped by the white side of the hyphen. Ooh. Oh man, y'all, y'all ain't ready, man. I'm ready. Hey, Rich, I'm ready to tuck this stuff back in the stash, man, and just stop, man. Y'all ain't ready, man. Listen to this. Listen to this. The African American scholar at the PWC&U assumes the guardianship of a long and storied tradition of intellectual activity fueled by service and increasingly shaped by the white side of the hyphen, while only recently has direct involvement in the academy occurred. The history of the black intellectual may argue extends back to the abolition period. Let me drink some water. During slavery, the economic ambitions of white America defined the status of black Americans. Slaves existed to improve the lifestyle of their masters. Blacks would be property forever, using, listen, y'all, listen, using their minds as well as their bodies. Black men and women struggled against these conditions. William Banks identified remnants of intellectual activity from West Africa and the earliest slave quarters. Harriet Tubman led blacks to freedom and Sojourner Truth lectured against slavery. The violent plans of Gabriel Presser, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner signaled black willingness to fight physically for their freedom, while Martin Delany, David Walker, Alexander Cromwell demonstrated black writers' insistence on their freedom in the first years of the 19th century. So what I need y'all to understand is what they're saying about the black scholar here. What they're telling you, David Johnson, is what they're telling you is the black intellectual activity is fueled by the service and increasingly shaped by the white side of the hyphen. So because we're in these universities, we're losing our thought of what blackness is. So now we say people of color. We get the white woman, we get the white man, and we don't invest back into the black community because we lost sight of what the Bois, Carter G. Woodson, we lost sight of Harold Cruz and all these people before us, what they fought for us to go to these universities to get education to bring it back to our people. They told you the talented 10 was supposed to be a group of exceptional men that will go in and be awakened to come redevelop what was destroyed. But because we went into these white institutions, our activity went on the white side of the hyphen. So again, why is this relevant in this lecture I'm giving? Because when you look at the Bois's way of thinking, the Boise way of thinking was to go into the institutions. He graduated from Harvard. But when the generations behind the Boise went into these institutions, they became institutionalized. And they didn't come out understanding the meaning of blackness. They didn't come out understanding the meaning of plowing the road. But when you look at Booker T. Washington's way of thinking of not going for racial equality and being self-sufficient, once they changed the regime, they turned their backs on Booker T. Washington at the same time. So then what do we do? So now let's get to Garvey. Because Garvey comes into the argument. Colorism and racism. Garvey and Du Bois and the other color line. Uh-oh. Now the battle starts. See, because now we come into the more the black power, the pro-black, the black nationalist way of thinking, which was started by the Martin Delaney's, the Henry Highland Garnets, and great men of their time before Marcus Garvey. And I'm going to introduce you to a Henry Highland Garnet and a Martin Delany, who was the first one to say Africa for the Africans. Not Marcus Garvey. It was Martin Delaney that was the first one that said Africa for the Africans. And on this Black History Month, I'm going to give you this information. So let's go. Let's get into it. 100 years ago, this month, Marcus Mosias Garvey and 13 associates gathered in Harlem basement to found the New York branch of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA. When the stocky, dark-skinned Garvey arrived in the United States in 1916, he had no plans to stay. He intended to raise funds for a school in Jamaica, modeled after Booker T. Washington's world-renowned Tuskegee Institute. With Washington dead, watch this, y'all. Watch this. I wish more people were here for this one because y'all gonna love this. With Washington dead, Garvey sought out W.E.B. Du Bois at the New York office of the NAACP. Du Bois was absent, and Garvey said he was unable to tell whether he was in a white office or that of the NAACP. The plethora of white and light-skinned people of the NAACP staff and all the light-skinned black people in the desirable positions in Black America no doubt contributed to Garvey's decision to remain in Harlem and establish his UNIA chapter there in 1917. So he walks into the headquarters, the chapter of the NAACP, and he's like, God damn, like everybody here look white. He's like, where the black folks at? And Garvey, and remember, he goes in there and Du Bois is not there at the time. Scholars were also taking note of these light-skinned people. 2 years after Garvey's jarring visit to the NAACP headquarters, psychologist in eugenics Edward Byron Reuter finished the mulatto in the United States in 1918. So the mulatto in the United States, from his base at the University of Iowa, Reuter made a name for himself, arguing that any black people achieving was in fact the achievement of biracial, light-skinned people. He's situated biracial, light-skinned people as a sort of a racial middle class below superior whites and above inferior black people. And you know what's funny? Hold on 1 second, y'all. Hold on 1 second. Give me 10 seconds. Give me 10 seconds. I'm back. Now, what I'm going to do now. This is going to be controversial. This is going to be real controversial, but I got to tell the truth. I got to talk about some of our grandparents and great grandparents. For those of you that may have fair-skinned grandparents, both of my grandparents, one from here in the Americas, one from the Caribbean. Both of them were high yellow and could pass for mixed race. And my grandmother, I used to hear my dad's mom make fun about dark-skinned women or dark-skinned people. My grandmother, and you know, a lot of our grandmas did. My grandmother didn't like white women, but didn't like the darkies either. And you know, me being a kid, I heard her make jokes. You know, she was light skinned with like straight hair. And you know, I heard her make jokes. So now we talk about this colorism, and I'm telling you guys, that's why I like to have real talk. This guy here, Edwin Byron, in 1918, my grandma was born in 1920, right? So she was raised up during this time of colorism. And this colorism was real. All of us out here know that some of us that's in our 40s over that can remember our grandmothers, a lot of our grandmothers dealt with this colorism too. Let's keep it above. Those of y'all in the chat room, man, I got 30 people watching. Man, everybody hit that thumb up. Everybody watching right now, everybody hit the thumb up, man, so we can start building this thing up, man. Now listen, I want y'all to look at this though. Edward Byron Reuter finished the mulatto in the United States. From his base at the University of Iowa, Reuter made a name for himself, arguing that anything, anything black people achieved was in fact the achievement of biracial light-skinned black people. This is what he said. So now, what I need you guys to understand, he's situated biracial light-skinned people as a sort of racial middle class below superior whites and above inferior full blacks. You guys need to understand the psychological effects that had on our grandparents, especially the ones that was light skinned, very light skinned, that may have got more privilege than our dark skinned grandparents. And maybe this is where you see the dark skinned black male and the light skinned woman grandma came from, because a lot of us had very, very, very dark skinned grandfathers and very fair skinned grandmothers, something that could damn near pass for white. We had them. And you have to, and then when I'm reading this information and you're seeing the differences in the way they classified our people, you get a chance to see the psychological effects it had on our people. Reuter was the latest in a long line of racist ideologues of colorism in the United States, an ideological line that begins with towering principal theologian Samuel Stunlow Smith. Now I'm gonna be talking about these guys in later in later streams. Samuel Dunlow Smith. I'm gonna break down the mulatto in the United States, that book that was written in 1918. All of this stuff is important. I got to get back to teaching, man, and really informing our people on a lot of stuff that we're not privy to. In 1787, before members of the American Psychological Society, some of whom would go on to write the U.S. Constitution that year, Smith praised domestic servants for having advanced far before the darker and Africanized field slaves. Now listen to this. This guy praised domestic servants for having advanced far before the darker and Africanized field slaves, though acquiring an agreeable and regular features of civilized society, light complexion, straight hair, thin lips. And a lot of our grandmothers or came out like that, and they had this colorism. They was able to advance far. So Garvey, coming from Jamaica, being dark skinned, man, he took umbrage with what he saw when he walked into that NAACP office. Colorism, like all forms of racism, rationalize color equalities with racist ideas by claiming the inequalities between dark and light skinned people are not due to discrimination against dark-skinned people, but the inferiorities of dark-skinned people. So, hold on a second. Racist ideas are not all the same because black people are not all the same. There are many types of racist ideas that meaning the different types of black people, including black women and black men, and light-skinned and dark-skinned people. A light skin is beautiful because of striking resemblance to beauty white people. Hold on. Let me get my reading here. A light skin is beautiful because of the striking resemblance. I keep getting these pop-ups, man. To beautiful white people as a different type of racist than dark skin is ugly because the striking dissemblance from beautiful white people. So that what they're trying to say is the light-skinned people have more white features than what you would have the dark-skinned person. So you have this woman back then, she would have been considered sexy. And my grandmother had that type of feature. High yellow, kind of straight hair. She had that feature. She had that feature that what we do today. That's the standard of beauty, what we call. So the nicest thing happens to girls with light, bright complexions. So this is the bleaching cream from back in the day. They were selling for 75 cents and $1.25. Has your phone quite ringing lately? Perhaps your complexion. Listen to this shit. Has your phone ringing quite lately? Perhaps your complexion is to blame. It is dark, dull, and unattractive. Then, for goodness sake, do something about it. See for yourself how quickly Napanola lightens and brightens your complexion, loosens black hairs, make your skin feel soft and smoother, looks clear and lovelier. There are two kinds. So they were selling bleaching cream all the way back then. The brand of colorism was was uh, was to Garvey's philosophy, and Garveyites made it their mission to attack colorism and the man they believed to be one of the chief arbiters, which was W.E.B. Du Bois. So he was trying to say, Riz, that W.E.B. Du Bois was the one pushing this colorism, this light skinned, accepted class, educated. They're more highly educated. They were the buffer class. You mulattoes, you high yellow Negroes, you're treated better than me. You're treated better than me. And we even put it in our jokes. African booty scratcher, the red bone. We pursued the red bone girl more. She was more sexy, especially if she was a red bone with a fat butt. If she was a red bone with a butt like a dark skinned girl, oh, she was gold. She was gold in the hood. So there's truths to what's being said. It was only a matter of time before Garvey and Du Bois became locked into debate, as Du Bois and Washington had done a decade earlier. Ironically, though, the Washington-Du Bois debate is remembered, while this enduring debate between Garvey has largely been forgotten. Du Bois and the talented Tim felt threatened by Garvey's exposure of the touchy reality of the light-skin privilege. Woo! Hey, this is good. This is good, good, good. Listen, y'all. Du Bois and the talented Tim felt threatened by Garvey's exposure of the touchy reality of light-skin privilege. Garvey is an extraordinary leader of men, Du Bois admitted in the crisis at the end of the 1920s. But it had been a mistake for him to try to bring Caribbean color politics to the United States. American Negroes recognized no color lines in or out of race. That was BS by Du Bois. Du Bois was out of line for saying that. Du Bois wrote, and they will in the end punish the man who attempts to establish it. So what Du Bois was saying was, man, ain't no colorism here. We all just Negroes, which we knew was a lie. And Garvey called it out quickly. Called it out. Let's read on. It was certainly the case that light-skinned blacks and biracial people in the Caribbean had more privileges than their counterparts in the United States. But to claim black people in the United States were colorblind in 1920, it was probably the silliest statement Du Bois' serious career. Yes, it was, and we know it was. But Garvey had Du Bois on the ropes with that statement. Garvey had Du Bois on the ropes with that statement. This is good. Because Garvey came out right from the door and started saying, wait a minute, man, you're duping black people because you're putting the more white, friendlier looking blacks in position next to white people. Because white people didn't want, except for that white woman, she wanted that big black man, but that's another story. But they didn't want the Garvey types, the dark-skinned man and woman, they wanted them to be mammies. So Du Bois was capitalizing off of that. And Garvey kicked in the door and said, man, stop playing, man. You're duping the people. So they went straight to war. He sounded as oblivious as the racists who had angered him for decades by discounting the existence of the other color line. And denying this color line, Du Bois discounted the existence of color discrimination. And in fact, blaming darker blacks for their disproportionate property. Come on, man. Listen, y'all, man. Boy, this thing here, Du Bois had eyes. He knew light-skinned people dominated the most desirable political and economic positions available to black people. In his own talented essay in 1903, he named 21 present and past black leaders. All of them, except Phillips Wheatley, were light-skinned and biracial. And guess what Garvey did? Garvey came and kicked the door in and called it right out. Trying to scratch my package. He probably heard circulating black children's rhyme. If you're white, you're right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. The Boise knew elite light skinned people knew light skinned people. Wait a minute. The Boise knew elite light skinned people were still using brown paper bags and rulers to bar dark skinned folks from churches, jobs, civic groups, historically black colleges, black fraternities and sororities, and even neighborhoods. The Boise was probably not oblivious. Most likely, he and his light skinned peers felt their light skinned privilege was threatened by discussions of colorism and color equality. Not unlike whites who felt their white privilege threatened the discussions of racism and racial equality. So white people didn't want to discuss racism and racial equality. Du Bois didn't want to discuss the colorism within the black community that Garvey was bringing up. Right. And see, this is very important, and this is why I wanted to do this. I wish I had my brother Moses here. Okay, hold on, where I'm at. Du Bois, and so Du Bois copied his enemies. He used racist ideas and his punishing power to silence the anti-racist challenge to color discrimination. Watch this. However, Garvey was not completely anti-racist in his debate. By 1920, Du Bois was reeling from the rise of eugenics and influence of anthropologist Franz Boas. I did videos on Franz Boas and the Eugenics Society. What's going on, Art Nasal? And the Eugenics Society. Allowing him to shed his earlier biological conceptions of race, that the racial groups were genetically distinct. Geneticists have since proven that the races are 99% genetically alike, and there is more genetic diversity between people of African descent than between black people and other black people. Garvey still believed wholeheartedly in the fallacy of biological racial distinction, and there being such as a thing as black blood and white blood. So Garvey was like, man, fuck all that shit. Let me watch my language, because I actually want the kids to be able to watch this. So let me chill out. Garvey was basically saying, forget all that. There's a difference between black blood and white blood. Garvey understood. He thereby joined with eugenics and Klansmen in looking down on biracial people and light-skinned people, and hailing President Warren G. Harding when he said in 1921, racial amalgamation there cannot be. So Garvey was like, listen, we shouldn't be mixed racing with these people at all. We should be doing our own thing. We should be doing our own thing. Instead of viewing light-skinned blacks as naturally equal to dark-skinned blacks from an anti-racist standpoint, Garvey fashioned the other less acknowledged ideologies side of colorism. Garvey more or less looked down on light-skinned blacks as inferior, holding dark skins as the standard of blackness, as some black power activists did 50 years ago, as some black activists do today. So what happened was Garvey looked down on them because he looked at them as weak. You would do anything to acquiesce to the white side, where the real superior ones was us. We was the ones working in that field. We was the ones basically moving everything to build this economy. It was off the back of that dark-skinned man and woman. It was us. So we were the superior ones. They was using us. So that was Garvey's ideology. I used to be reeling from the other side of colorism. I can still remember when I was awakening. This is his perspective. I don't want to get his perspective. I want to get the perspective of. Hold on. I'll read it. I used to be reeling from the other side of colorism. I can still remember when I was an awakening undergraduate student at Florida A&M University. I made it my mission not to date light-skinned women. My friends thought I had lost my mind. I went through the same thing. When I was younger, I dated all dark-skinned girls, and people used to look at me like I was crazy. Man, she pretty for a dark-skinned girl, but why you with her? Why you with that booty scratching? Man, all she got is a fat ass. She not pretty in the face because our standard of beauty was light skin. I desired dark skinned women, the darker the better. And I looked down on my friends who desired light skinned women, the lighter the better. I hardly realized my own racist hypocrisy that in turning colorism its own head is still exhibiting colorism. And it shows how powerful this white supremacy thing was working. It had Garvey and the Boise fighting each other instead of understanding that the system of white supremacy is what's created the light skinned black and what's put down the dark skinned black. And they were fighting each other on this colorism thing for power. But at the same time, the system still was winning because you had these two powerful giants banging against each other. And so was Garvey. But to be clear, Garvey was neither a eugenics nor a segregationist. In contrast to eugenics, who were advocating white racial purity and opposing interracial reproduction due to the intrusion of the inferior black blood, Garvey advocated black racial purity, opposing interracial reproduction due to the intrusion of different white blood. We should not confuse Garvey separatists who actually believed in separate but equal with segregationists who really believe in separate but equal. We should also not keep Du Bois as a static figure. By the 1930s, he had shed much of his elitism, and his elitism and colorism seemed to be. I can only know that word. That's why I need Brother Moses, because see, Brother Moses know the big words, Kenny Conjo. He, he had moved. He had moved to the right side of history. This time, engaging in the very public debate against the new NAACP Executive Secretary Walter White, a stringent integrationist and assimilationist, raging the new fangled black nationalism of Du Bois. Du Bois whites once repeatedly expressed that unmixed Negroes were inferior. Unmixed Negroes were inferior. Uh, 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 Infidelity inferior now. So he said unmixed Negroes were inferior. From from an anti-racist perspective, no group of black folks are inferior, but now, not ever, not dark skin, not light skin. A century ago, both Du Bois and Garvey were wrong. We have to recognize light skin privilege and the other color line. We have to recognize dark skin is not the essential and pure standard of blackness. We have to recognize colorism as racism, and we have to really understand that Garvey in his later years began to change. And I'm gonna break down Walter White. I got Walter White queued up and coming. So what I want to do is I want to go here, right? And we look at the three visions. We put them all three of them down. We look at from the Constitutional Rights Foundation, and we look at the three visions here. Eric B. Quasi, fast forward to today. Let's look at these so-called these so-called reality shows. 95 people are right. I agree. So let's look here. The problem for African Americans in the early years of the 20th century was how to respond to a white society that, for the most part, did not want to treat black people as equals. Three visionaries offered different solutions to the problem. Booker T. Washington argued for African Americans to first improve themselves through education, industrial training, and business ownership. Equal rights would naturally come later. He believed W.E.B. Du Bois agreed that self-improvement was a good idea, but it should not happen at the expense of giving up all immediate full citizenship rights. Hold on a second. Hold on 1 second. Give me 1 second, y'all. Yeah, I'm back. What's going on, Diego Costa? Yeah, I ain't got nobody on here with me, so I gotta answer the phone. All right. So let's look at it from this perspective. Booker T. Oh, yeah, okay, so I got that. Did you take your medicine? What are you downstairs for? All right. W.E.B. Du Bois argued that self-improvement was a good idea, but that it should not happen at the expense of giving up immediate full citizenship rights. Another visionary, Marcus Garvey, believed Black Americans would never be accepted as equals in the United States. He pushed them to develop their own separate communities or even immigrate back to Africa. And I want y'all to understand that thought process of teaching from Garvey did not come from Garvey alone. There were people before Garvey that pushed this, and Garvey came and pushed it forward. Garvey came and pushed it forward. So I read to you guys about Booker T. Washington, where he was born, and all these things. But I want to read. I want to really push forward before I get into my other people, right? I really want to push this forward. So let's look at it. Washington. What? I don't know. Get out of here. It's on the counter. Go look for it. All right. Let's look at it from this aspect here. Washington designed, developed, and guided the Tuskegee Institute. So Washington designed it, he developed it, and he guided it. So that means that he knew how to design, he knew how to build. He was a problem solver. He knew how to create things with his hands. And this is what Booker T. Washington wanted to do. It became a powerhouse of African American education and political influence in the United States. He used the Hampton Institute with its emphasis on agriculture and industrial training as his model. And this is all three. I'm going over this for people that came in late. This is another aspect of it. Washington believed that his vision for Black people would eventually lead to equal political and civil rights. In the meantime, he advised Blacks to put aside immediate demands for voting and ending racial segregation. So he went to segregationists. He was like, man, listen, let's do our own thing. This is what Booker T is saying. Why are you still in the kitchen? Come on, out. Go take your medicine. My son. All right. Washington believed that the vision for Blacks would eventually lead to equality and civil rights. In the meantime, he advised Blacks to put aside immediate demands for voting and equal segregation. In his famous essay, and I wrote this, the 1895, the Cotton States, an International Exposition in Atlanta, Georgia, Washington accepted the reality of racial segregation. He insisted, however, that African Americans be included in the economic process of the South. Washington declared to an all-white audience, and all things social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet as the one hand, as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. Washington went on to express his confidence that no race that has anything to contribute, no race that has anything to contribute to the markets of the world is long in any degree ostracized, shut out. White Americans view Washington's vision as the key to racial peace in the nation. So whites wanted him to shut the hell up. Whites didn't want him to speak on anything. With the aid of white philanthropists such as Andrew Carnegie, Washington's Tuskegee Institute, and its philanthropy of economics, first and equality rights later thrived. So because he shut his mouth on political issues, he had the help of people like the Carnegie. So then we get to Du Bois. And we know that Du Bois attacked Washington's acceptance and racial segregation, arguing that this only encouraged whites to deny African Americans the right to vote and to undermine Black pride and progress. Du Bois also criticized Washington's Tuskegee approach as an attempt to educate Black boys and girls simply as servants and underlings. So right there, they was gangbanging. They was already warned. So now you got Booker T. Washington teaching us down there to be self-sufficient, and Du Bois like, man, you teaching them to be underlying the white folks. You ain't teaching them to get no power. This is what's happening. We put in layman's term. This is what's happening. Right, Doug? This is what's happening. So Du Bois was like, man, we need education. We need rights. We don't just need to be self-sufficient. We need power. So now they're arguing. The arguing is ensuing. Lynchings and riots, lynchings and riots against blacks led to the formation in 1909 of the NAACP, an organization with a mainly black leadership, except for Du Bois, who became the editor. Well, membership. The founding board of directors consisted of white civil rights leaders. The NAACP used publicity, protests, lawsuits, and editorial pages of the crisis to attack racial segregation, discrimination, and the lynching of blacks. Booker T. Washington rejected this confrontation or approach. And by the time of his death in 1915, his Tuskegee vision had lost influence among many African Americans. So now Booker T rejected any thought of challenging whites. So during that time, you can look at how both of these men would be viewed. By World War I, Du Bois had become the leading black figure in the United States, but he became disillusioned after World War I when white Americans continued to deny black Americans equal political and civil rights. So he saw what he was doing wasn't working. During the Great Depressions of the 1930s, Du Bois increasingly advocated socialist solutions to the national economic problems. He also questioned the NAACP's goal as a racially integrated society. This led to his resignation as the editor of the Crisis in 1934. Du Bois grew increasingly critical of U.S. capitalism and foreign policy. He praised the accomplishment of communism in the Soviet Union. In 1961, he joined the U.S. Communist Party. Shortly after, he left the country, renounced his American citizenship, and became a citizen of Ghana in Africa. He died at the age of 95 in 1963. Du Bois never took part in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, which secured many of the rights that he had fought for during his time. Now, one would have to ask, why would he never join the civil rights movement? Africa is the future. So now we get to Garvey, right? Marcus Garvey, the third major black visionary in the early part of the 20th century, was born in Jamaica in 1887. He founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, in 1914. The UNIA stressed racial pride and self-development, much like the views of Booker T. Washington, whom Garvey admired. Garvey, however, had greater international ambitions, including the development of worldwide black-owned industries and shipping lines. He also called for the end of white colonial rule in Africa. At the invitation of Washington, Garvey traveled to the United States in 1916. He soon established his UNIA in New York City, opened a restaurant, and started a newspaper. In 1919, he formed the Black Star Line, the first black-owned shipping company in the United States. The publicity over the Black Star Line caused great excitement among black Americans, many of whom bought stock in it. Garvey organized huge parades to promote and other UNIA projects. He often appeared in colorful uniforms wearing a plum hat. He also raised funds. The UNIA also raised funds to help the things that was going on in Haiti. I got that coming too. In 1920, over 20,000 people attended Garvey's first UNIA convention in New York City, in New York. The convention produced a Declaration of Negro Rights, which denounced lynchings, segregation, segregated public transportation, job discrimination, and inferior black public schools. The document also demanded Africa for the Africans. Without actually consulting any African people, the convention proclaimed the Garvey the provisional president of Africa. What's going on, Jam Cam? Good to see you over here. Garvey believed that white society would never accept black Americans as equal. Therefore, he called for separate self-development of African Americans within the United States. Garvey said they would never accept us. So we have to do for self. The UNIA set up many set up many small black-owned businesses such as restaurants, groceries, and publishing houses, and even a toy company that made black toys. Garvey's goal was to create a separate economy and society run for and by black Americans. A poor economy and near bankruptcy, the start line caused Garvey to seek more dues paying members to the UNIA. He launched a recruitment campaign in the South, which he had ignored because of strong white resistance. In a bizarre twist, Garvey met with a leader of the Ku Klux Klan in Atlanta in 1922. Garvey declared the goal of the UNIA and the KKK was the same: completely separate black and white societies. And you remember when Elijah Muhammad met with the KKK. Garvey even praised racial segregation laws, explaining that they were good for building a black business. Little came from his recruitment effort. Criticism from his followers grew. In 1922, the U.S. government arrested Garvey for mail fraud for his attempt to sell more stock in the failing Black Star Line. At his trial, the evidence showed that Garvey was a poor businessman, but the facts were less clear about outright fraud. The jury convicted him anyway, and he was sentenced to prison. Well, they wanted to get him out of the way. In 1920, in 1927, President Calvin Coolidge committed his sentence. He was released. The government immediately deported him to Jamaica. His vision for black separatism, and back to America never caught on with most African Americans, and his spectacular movement soon faded away. Garvey died in 1940, an almost forgotten man. The visions of Washington, Du Bois, and Garvey all fell short of settling the future of black people in American society. In the mid 20th century, new leaders emerged to guide the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King and others pursued a strategy of passive nonviolence to overcome segregation in the South. Leaders of the NAACP, such as Thurgood Marshall, pushed forward legal cases to end segregation. Some took more militant stands. The black Muslims, led by Elijah Muhammad, advocated separations. Malcolm X broke from the Muslims and founded a rival organization opposing separation. The Black Panthers, led by Huey Newton, prepared for revolution. Today, new black leaders continue to struggle amongst themselves over the best way for African Americans to improve their lives. And this is the problem. This is the problem. And this is why I did this stream, because this stream is important. This stream is important as to what it is that we should be doing moving forward, Doug, and how we have to fight amongst each other. Now, what I want to do is I want to read two more things to you guys, and then I'm gonna break out. I'm gonna break out because I know it's hard keeping the attention of people when I'm actually teaching. This is a biography of a man named Henry Highland Garnett, and most of you probably never even heard of this man. But listen to this, right? Henry Highland Garnett was an African American, best known as an abolitionist, whose call to rebellion speech in 1843 encouraged slaves to rebel against their owners. And I heard some people say that we wasn't fighting, that we wasn't willing to fight. Some people said that we wouldn't fight, y'all. Well, I disagree. Let's read this about Henry Highland Garnett. And he was before Garvey. Henry Highland Garnett was an African American abolitionist born December 23rd, 1815 in Kent County, Maryland. Born a slave, Garnett and his family escaped to New York when he was about 9 years old. In 1840, he became an abolitionist. His call to rebellion speech in 1843 encouraged slaves to free themselves by rising up against owners. Seen as a radical, he became a controversial figure within the abolitionist movement. In 1865, Garnett became the first black speaker to preach a sermon in the House of Representatives. How many of y'all knew that? In 1881, he was appointed United States Minister and Consul General, a position equivalent to ambassador today in Liberia. and died there a few months later in 1882. Early life of slavery. Abolitionist activist Minister Henry Howard Gardner. Oh, hold on. Yeah, let me get it down here. Call to Rebellion movement, a tireless activist in the fight to end slavery. Garnet worked with the likes of William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass. He became well known for his skills as an orator. In 1843, Garnet gave one of the most famous speeches, usually referred to as the Call to Rebellion, at the National Negro Convention. Rather than try to sway whites to end slavery, he encouraged the slaves to obtain their freedom themselves by rising up against their owners. This was a radical idea at the time, and both Douglas and Garrison opposed it. The convention refused to endorse Garrett's speech after taking a vote on the matter. That's why they didn't like him. That's why they didn't like him and Martin Delany. In 1850, Garnet traveled to England and Scotland, where he spoke widely against the practice of slavery. He also supported allowing blacks to immigrate to other lands, such as Liberia and Africa, a country made up mostly of freed slaves. In 1852, Garland traveled to Jamaica to serve as a missionary. After returning to the United States, Garnet became a pastor in the Shiloh Church in New York City. He continued to work to end slavery, but his influence within the abolitionist movement had been somewhat diminished because of his radical views. See, you still had Negroes that didn't want to be radical. You still had Negroes that didn't want to be a part of what it was that he was trying to do. Final years. During the Civil War, he found himself the target of public anger over the issue of slavery. A mob of people sought to attack Garnet during the 1863 draft riots in New York City. They crowded in his streets, but they were unable to locate him and his family. The following year, Garnet moved to Washington, D.C. to serve as a pastor of the 15th Street Presbyterian Church. In 1865, while Washington, Garland made history when he was chosen by President Abraham Lincoln to give the sermon before the House of Representatives, making him the first black speaker to do so. In 1881, President James A. Garfield appointed Garnett to serve as the United States Minister and Consul General, ambassador to Liberia, fulfilling his lifelong dream to travel to Africa. Unfortunately, his time in Africa was short. Garnett died in 1882, only a few months after his arrival. His words may be Garnett's last legacy. It is believed that Garnett's call to rebellion helped inspire others in the abolitionist movement to take action, including John Brown, who led the attack in 1859 and led the 1859 attack on the Arsenal Harper's Ferry in Virginia, now West Virginia. So when we read these people, you know, in this Black History Month, these people that I will be bringing out, I'm gonna end this here. I don't want to take it any further, but these people that I will be bringing out on this Black History Month, you'll get a chance to see a lot of people, man, that's been erased from history and people don't talk about. Tomorrow I'll be talking about Martin Delany, Ida B. Wells, and Carter Woodson. All throughout this month, I'm going to be talking about African American inventors, African American achievers, and those of us that was fighting on the front line for our independence and racial equality. So look forward to these videos, man. I'm not going to keep this too long because I definitely want to keep the attention of the people. So I'm going to end this here. So remember, I love my people more than they hate themselves. And I pray to the universal creator most high that these words was enough to inspire you. These words are enough to make you look at yourself in the mirror and make change. These words are enough to make you look at your children and know you have to make change. I hope that when you came here for information, and when you leave here greater than what you was before you came. I hope that you share this information with your children, share it with your husband, share it with your wife, share it with anybody that got an ear to hear, let them listen. It's Black History Month. Black History Month should be every day of our lives, but I'm going to focus on this on February, and I'm going to bring this information to you guys. I did this thing today on the Bois, Booker T, and Garvey because it's a conversation that should be had. You know, maybe I'll do a live stream probably sometime this week where I can get some brothers on and we can just have an educated discussion on these ancestors, man. Maybe I can get Brother Robin, and we can get people to take different sides as to which way they think we should go. It's necessary. So let me get out of here without any further shenanigans. Remember, I love y'all, man. I love y'all. I'll share the screen. Thank y'all for coming in, man. Until the next time, peace, peace, Diego Costa, peace.